There were numerous United States Naval Advanced Amphibious Bases, often termed U.S. Naval Advance Bases or landing craft bases in the UK during World War II, particularly concentrated in southwest England with major concentrations in the Plymouth Command area including Falmouth and Dartmouth. The U.S. Navy operated these bases in coordination with UK forces to maintain the massive fleet of vessels required for landing operations. This account is taken from the official history of the United States Naval Advanced Amphibious Base at Southampton, USNAAB. At 1300 on May 11, 1944, less than a month before D-Day, Lieutenant Commander Richard S. Aldrich, USNR, as commanding officer, established the Advanced Amphibious Base with headquarters in the Star Hotel, Southampton. During the ensuing 14 months, up to and after V-Day, this naval base developed into an active center of naval operations and, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Hamilton Moses, Jr., USNR after November 24, 1944, it continued to carry on a logistics and ship repair and maintenance activity until 2 months after the war in Europe was at an end. The base was established to, 1. Provide logistic support to U.S. naval forces in the Southampton and Portsmouth area, 2. To maintain and repair U.S. manned ships and craft, 3. To aid the Royal Navy in handling U.S. manned ships and loading military forces onto them, 4. To have general administrative cognizance over and provide logistic support to the U.S. Naval Administrative Representatives at Leamington as well as the Engineering and Signal Office at Calshot and a VHF radio station on the Isle of Wight. When the base started it had only 12 officers and 73 enlisted men. This complement mushroomed into 66 officers, for civilian technicians and 466 enlisted men by May 31. Thereafter, its average strength was 65 officers permanently attached and 800 enlisted men. The first fortnight in the life of the base was a busy time but not hectic. The men who came here and took part in preparing the many centers of activity, which meant cleaning up bomb damage, washing, patching, and where possible, painting, did a miraculous job. During this time 8 air raid alerts interrupted the routine, but although bombs were dropped, no damage to naval property or injury to personnel resulted. This was true of all enemy aerial activity in this city until the end of hostilities. As D-Day neared amid the excitement of building a base there was ever present, the question in the minds of all men, when will the big day arrive? They didn't have to wait long. Each day brought indications of the approach of that great invasion. And on May 31, from 1900 hours, all enlisted men were given the order, no liberty. We were nearing the end of the long wait. Supplies, repairs, preparations of all sorts, kept men working overtime. Every department was growing quickly to handle peak loads. And then, on June 6, D-Day. Build up. Here started the story of landing ship tanks and landing craft tanks loading at the Four Hearts, rushing their cargoes of men, supplies, freight cars and equipment to the far shore and returning at first, carrying American and British wounded, later, with cargoes of thousands of German prisoners and released slave laborers, to load again and again, in a continuous round of shuttle trips. This was the beginning of the build-up which reinforced troops who stormed Normandy's shores in the first days of the assault. Coinciding with this increased shuttle activity came a vast amount of maintenance work, which resulted in a long story of repair, salvage, rebuilding and supplying of ships and heavy communications traffic and numerous other supporting functions. The base was providing support and operational direction for from 100 to 115 ships and craft at all times. Neither the 60 or more air raid alerts nor the 169 German pilotless aircraft, called V-1s or doodlebugs, which fell in Hampshire County, interrupted this furious activity. One of the first tangible indications that a beachhead had been successfully established came with the founding of a dispatch boat service from Southampton to the far shore, terminating at Omaha Beach. Another bit of evidence of the sea warfare which was taking place were the 2,500 or more survivors of marine disasters which the base received and cared for, as well as the 15,000 transient officers and men it handled. 2 days before Christmas enlisted men of the base took part in a huge Christmas party for 1,000 Southampton children at the Guildhall, collaborating with 14th Port, U.S. Army Headquarters companies in the festivities. Christmas came and went and the final month of 1944 passed with no air raid alerts. The last one of the war had been heard in November 1944. The activity index decreased slightly but maintained a busy level with the turn of the year. Loading of LCTS aboard Liberty ships for return to the States got underway at Portsmouth Dockyard, where a small sub-base was established for that purpose. In February, further attention was paid to the construction of new huts for housing base services. Seabees built 8 at the supply lot on Lower High Street for storing supplies, and an addition was made to sick bay facilities with a second hut for this unit. The base started servicing the destroyers and destroyer escorts, 5 each week, which escorted the large U.S.-bound convoys. As other bases to the westward closed, this base became responsible for more and more ships and soon was providing services for 50 landing ship tanks, 12 landing craft infantries, large and sundry other U.S. ships. Recreational improvements were effected for both officers and enlisted men during March. 4 huts were erected at the camp for an enlisted men's center and an officers' club was built in the available quarters off the Star Hotel alley. The fire at Maintenance was the news highlight of the month. On the April 15th, the Army and Navy combined in a great memorial service at the Guildhall for the late Commander-in-Chief, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who died on the 12th. Many civilians attended to show their respect for our war leader. The first year of life of the U.S. Naval Advanced Amphibious Base at Southampton drew to a close just 3 days after the leaders of our great Allied powers had declared May 8 as VE Day. It had seen intense preparations, tense assault, driving build-up and a constant flow of men and munitions to the shores of France, culminating in the liberation of all Europe, and in the meeting of Russian, British, French and American forces on common fronts. A few figures taken on June 1, 1945, will give an idea of the mammoth job the base played in that victory. Over 8,000 ships carried 1,800,000 men and 240,000 vehicles plus 2,750,000 deadweight tons of cargo from Southampton to the continent. Of those 8,000 ships, 5,825 of them were landing ships and craft. Over 60% of all American men and equipment shipped from UK ports to the continent were shipped from Southampton. Shortly after the celebration of the war's end in Europe, new men began to arrive from the States to act as replacements for those of us who had been overseas for 18 months to over 2 years. These men quickly fitted into the program of base activity, which now consisted primarily of repairing and readying the landing ship tanks and other landing craft for the long voyage home which we knew was soon to come. Today, Southampton is a relatively quiet place, for the familiar scenes of landing ship tanks at the Hards and Liberty parties coming ashore have faded into memories. Each day at the entrance to hut camp, shipmates can be seen bidding fond farewells to departing friends with whom they have lived, worked and played for a long 2 years. These are friendships which will never cease. Those of us who remain are busily engaged in the activities characteristic of a closing base. Supplies and inventories are to be made ready for shipping, for our day of departure is near at hand. Our stay in England has been a pleasant one, and in future years when time is taken to reread the history book of life, this will indeed be a worthwhile chapter.